Imagine dedicating your life to your art, pouring your soul onto canvas, only for your masterpieces to gather dust in obscurity. What if, one day, one of those forgotten creations mysteriously vanished, only to reappear in the hands of an anonymous buyer, changing your life forever? This isn't fiction, it's the true story of an artist whose unseen genius finally found its admirer. Elias Hart lived in a cramped studio at the edge of the city, a place where cracked windows let in more cold than light and the smell of turpentine lingered in the air like a second skin. His walls leaned with canvases, towering storms of color, haunting portraits, dreamscapes where reality seemed to unravel. Yet no matter how alive those paintings were, they remained unseen. For years, Elias poured everything he had into his work, but outside those peeling walls, the world moved on without him. He survived on odd jobs, washing dishes at the cafe down the block, sweeping galleries that would never hang his art, sketching quick portraits for tourists who forgot his name before they walked away. Each paycheck stretched thinner than the last, rent devouring most of it, hunger swallowing the rest. The only indulgence he allowed himself was a single cup of coffee at dawn, when he would sit by the window and watch the sunrise spill across the skyline. To him, even the morning sky felt like a canvas. People who met him thought him eccentric, maybe stubborn, but Elias couldn't stop. Art wasn't a career he had chosen, it was a compulsion. Every brushstroke felt like a heartbeat. Every canvas was a confession. And yet, rejection was all he knew. Galleries politely declined, collectors barely glanced his way, even his family had stopped asking about his so-called dream. Still, Elias painted, clinging to a stubborn belief that one day, someone might finally see. The month's end came heavy with dread. Rent was due, bills piled on his desk like silent judges, and his cupboard was nearly bare. Out of desperation, Elias dragged one of his smaller canvases to a local art fair. The piece, a storm swallowing a city skyline, wasn't just paint. It was his loneliness, his grief, his life. He sold it for $20 to a hurried woman in a red scarf who didn't even pause to glance at his signature. She tucked it under her arm as though it were nothing more than a souvenir. Elias forced a polite smile, but inside, something in him broke. That night he thought about quitting. What was the point of bearing his soul to canvases destined for dust? Just once, he wanted to know what it felt like for his work to matter. To move someone. To not be invisible. Then, a week later, something unexplainable happened. He awoke to find one of his largest paintings missing. It wasn't just any canvas, it was the invisible canvas, the work he considered his masterpiece. Nearly his own height, it depicted a lone figure walking into a blinding horizon. He had painted it during the coldest winter of his life, when despair nearly swallowed him whole. To lose it now was unbearable. Yet there was no broken lock, no forced entry. The painting was simply gone. Panic clawed at him. Who would steal from someone who had nothing? Fear turned to anger. If it had been taken for profit, it might end up pawned, discarded, misunderstood. But that evening, as Elias scrolled the arts section of a local online magazine on a borrowed phone, his breath caught. There, in a grainy photograph, was his painting. The invisible canvas, unmistakable, hanging in a private exhibition. Beside it stood a blurred figure, their face hidden in shadow. The caption read, "Anonymous patron acquires previously unknown masterpiece. Artist undisclosed." Elias dropped the phone, his pulse racing. His work hadn't been stolen for cash, it had been purchased. By someone who wanted no credit, no recognition. An anonymous admirer. Over the following days, whispers trickled through the city's art world. Collectors gossiped about a mysterious figure who had begun acquiring the works of forgotten artists, elevating them overnight. Some said it was a billionaire philanthropist. Others claimed it was a disillusioned gallery owner. No one knew for certain. What Elias knew was this: his art was finally alive, finally seen. Yet not under his name. Not with his story. His identity had been stripped from his creation. Should he feel grateful, or furious? That question haunted him as he lay awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling of his studio. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Slipped under his door, plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single line, handwritten in neat cursive, "Elias, your art deserves the world. Trust me, this is only the beginning." His hands trembled as he read it over and over. Whoever had taken his painting not only knew his work, they knew his name. His address. His life. For the first time in years, Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. But were they the eyes of a savior, or a predator? And the very next morning, when he woke, another canvas was gone. The morning sunlight slanted through the cracked blinds, pale and unforgiving, when Elias noticed the gap on his wall. Another painting was missing. This time it was Winter's Silence, a smaller canvas, but one of his most personal, an image of a child crouched in snow, arms wrapped around themselves, waiting for a warmth that never came. He had painted it after his mother's funeral, grief clawing at every brushstroke. The thought of a stranger stealing it made his stomach knot with fury. The letter still sat on his table. Its words seemed to glow in the dim light, "This is only the beginning." Elias read them again, his pulse racing. Whoever this anonymous admirer was, they weren't just taking his art. They were sending him a message. At first, Elias tried to convince himself this was opportunity in disguise. His work was finally leaving these suffocating walls. Perhaps this admirer really did mean well. Perhaps his art was destined for more than dust and obscurity. But the unease never left. Recognition without identity was hollow. It wasn't him the world was applauding, it was his ghost. That evening, as he walked home from the cafe, Elias noticed something that froze him mid-step. Across the street, near a flickering lamppost, stood a figure. They were half hidden in shadow, a long coat hanging loosely around them, collar pulled high. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Elias felt the weight of those unseen eyes pressing against his chest. He quickened his pace. When he glanced back moments later, the figure was gone. Sleep eluded him. The silence of his apartment was broken only by the occasional creak of wood, the hum of the old refrigerator, the thump of his heart in his ears. Every shadow in the corner seemed to stretch too far, every flicker of headlights outside looked like someone waiting. When exhaustion finally dragged him under, his dreams were filled with canvases melting, faces in the paint watching him with hollow eyes. 2 nights later, another letter came. This one was longer. "Elias, your suffering is what makes your work divine. The world doesn't deserve you, but I do. I see what others are blind to. I feel what you bury in every brushstroke. Don't be afraid, I will take care of you, just as I've taken care of your art. One day soon, you will understand we were always meant to be connected." The handwriting was elegant, precise. Every curve of ink looked intentional. Elias felt his throat tighten. The words were tender, almost affectionate, but beneath them coiled something darker, something possessive. He wanted to call the police, but what could he say? That someone had stolen his paintings. He had no receipts, no documentation, no proof they were his. He was a starving artist, invisible to the system. And deep down, he knew the police wouldn't take him seriously. The next day, Elias visited the gallery where the invisible canvas had been spotted. He walked through the glass doors, palms sweating, pretending to be just another patron. His eyes darted across the room until they landed on it, his masterpiece, mounted on a pristine white wall, lit by a single spotlight. It took his breath away. He had never seen it displayed like this. The colors blazed with a life the dim light of his apartment could never provide. People stood before it, whispering, tilting their heads, marveling. For the first time, Elias saw strangers moved by his work. His chest swelled with pride, then collapsed with fury. His name wasn't there. Instead, the plaque read simply, "Artist Unknown." As he stood frozen, a whisper brushed his ear. "Beautiful, isn't it? Elias turned sharply. A man stood beside him, tall, middle-aged, wearing a dark coat and a faint smile. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, seemed to study Elias with unsettling intensity. "Yes," Elias managed, his voice unsteady. "True genius rarely survives in obscurity," the man continued, as though reciting a script. "It requires intervention." His lips curled into something between a smile and a smirk. "Don't you agree?" Before Elias could respond, the man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. But Elias felt his gaze linger, even as he vanished. That night, another letter arrived. This one chilled him to the bone. "You saw them today, didn't you? How they worship what they don't understand. They will never know the agony behind those colors, but I do. Elias, I was there, standing beside you. Did you feel it too, the connection? Don't run from it. Soon, I'll reveal myself. But for now, know this, every masterpiece you create belongs to us." Elias dropped the letter, his hands trembling. Whoever this admirer was, they weren't just a benefactor. They were watching him, following him, claiming him. His art wasn't being celebrated, it was being taken hostage. Days blurred into nights. Elias painted less, unable to focus. Every creak in the hallway made his pulse spike. Every stranger's glance on the street felt like surveillance. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear gnawed harder. He considered leaving the city, but where would he go? His art tied him here, and so, it seemed, did his admirer. Then, one night, he returned home to find his door ajar. His stomach dropped. Slowly, he pushed it open. Inside, his apartment was eerily tidy. Nothing seemed broken or ransacked. But on the center of his desk sat another envelope, larger this time, heavier. His name was written across the front in that same elegant script. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Each one of Elias, sleeping in his bed, sketching by the window, walking to the cafe, staring at the sunrise with his coffee. Some were taken from angles inside his apartment. His throat went dry. His admirer hadn't just stolen his art. They had invaded his life. They were already inside. And at the bottom of the pile, the last photo made him stumble back in horror. It was a picture of Elias standing in front of the invisible canvas at the gallery, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. But in the photograph, just over his shoulder, the tall man in the dark coat was smiling. Beneath it, scrawled in ink, "Soon, Elias. Soon, we will meet properly." Elias felt the room spin around him. The walls of his apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. His masterpiece had been taken, his privacy shattered, his safety stolen. The question was no longer who this admirer was. It was how far they were willing to go. And that's where we leave Elias, for now. His art no longer just hangs on forgotten walls. It's in the hands of someone who sees more than the paint, someone who sees him. But is this admiration, or obsession? Has Elias found his first true patron, or has he invited a predator into his life? I want to know what you think. What would you do if your greatest masterpiece disappeared, only to reappear in the hands of an anonymous admirer? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've been hooked by Elias's journey so far, don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling chapter of this story.